The night sky over the Mediterranean in early November 1940 hid a secret that would shake the balance of naval power. Few outside Britain's Admiralty knew that the Royal Navy was preparing something no major fleet had ever attempted: a full-scale carrier-launched torpedo assault against a fortified harbor. The target was Taranto, heart of the Italian battle fleet and one of the most heavily defended naval bases in Europe. Yet beneath the Admiralty's confidence ran a current of uncertainty. Intelligence reports, inconsistent and sometimes contradictory, hinted at unusual Italian movements around the port. Some analysts quietly wondered whether the Regia Marina suspected something, or if their defenses were weakening from within. By autumn, the Mediterranean had become a chessboard of shifting threats. Italy had entered the war in June, bringing a powerful fleet into play: 6 battleships, numerous cruisers, destroyers, and submarines. Their anchorage at Taranto posed a constant danger to British convoys heading from Alexandria to Malta. Admiral Andrew Cunningham, commander of the British Mediterranean Fleet, understood that unless this threat was neutralized, the Allies would face logistical strangulation. The struggle was not only military, it was psychological. British sailors, stretched thin in a precarious theater, needed a bold success. The plan that emerged was named Operation Judgement. It centered on the aircraft carrier HMS Illustrious, equipped with Fairey Swordfish torpedo bombers from the 813, 815, 819, and 824 Naval Air Squadrons. These canvas-winged biplanes looked outdated even in 1940, their top speed barely touching 140 knots. But their crews were skilled, their torpedoes reliable, and their low-speed maneuverability made them ideal for nighttime harbor strikes. One pilot later wrote in his logbook, "If stealth had wings, it would look like a swordfish. Slow enough to be forgotten, silent enough to be deadly." The words encapsulated the strange duality of the mission: technologically primitive aircraft assigned to one of the most daring naval operations of the war. As preparations advanced aboard Illustrious, the intelligence puzzle deepened. Reconnaissance photos confirmed that 3 Italian battleships, Conte di Cavour, Littorio, and Caio Duilio, were docked at Taranto. But analysts noticed inconsistencies. Barrage balloons, part of the harbor's anti-torpedo defense, were fewer than expected. Some gun emplacements appeared manned, others were inexplicably inactive. A report on October 30th noted gaps in the balloon line and unusual personnel rotations near the naval arsenal. Nothing conclusive, yet enough to raise questions. Cunningham remained cautious but pressed ahead. Surprise, he believed, would outweigh uncertainties. On November 11th, the operation entered its final hours. Mechanics worked silently on torpedoes and flares, while pilots reviewed target maps by dim lamplight. Flight Commander Lieutenant Commander Kenneth Williamson briefed his crews. They would approach Taranto at mast height, navigating by moonlit water and dead reckoning. Any mistake, too much altitude, too little precision, meant certain death. The Swordfish lacked modern navigation aids. Even the compass was prone to interference. The challenge was not just combat but orientation in a vast, dark sea. Just before evening mess, a quiet announcement echoed over the carrier's tannoy: "Air crews of the first wave, report to the briefing room." Tension rose across the hangar deck. Men glanced at each other, each aware this mission could decide the fate of the Mediterranean. Historical context made the moment heavier. No navy had successfully executed a torpedo attack in such shallow water. Taranto's harbor averaged only 12 meters deep, too shallow for standard torpedoes, which typically dove beneath their targets. British engineers had modified the weapons with wooden fins to stabilize them, but whether they would run properly was still uncertain. As sunset approached, the sea turned a dark copper beneath the horizon. Sailors helped wheel the Swordfish into position. Their engines sputtered with the familiar rattle of Bristol Pegasus radials warming to life. Flight Lieutenant John Wellham recalled hearing a mechanic murmur, "Bring her home, Jack," as he tightened the last strap on the wing rack. It was a small gesture, but heavy with meaning. Every man knew how exposed the pilots would be. Then came the moment. At 2040 hours, the first Swordfish lifted off Illustrious deck, followed one by the rest of the wave. Lanterns on the carrier's stern flickered behind them as they disappeared into the night. Pilots flew barely above the water, engines throttled back to minimize visibility. Crews scanned the sky for Italian reconnaissance aircraft. None appeared, a fact that puzzled observers on the bridge. Had the Italians reduced patrols? Were they overconfident? Or was something else at play? As the aircraft pressed deeper into the Adriatic, the tension grew. The pilots could see the faint shimmer of coastal lights. They knew Taranto was close. But they also knew something else. No matter how meticulous the planning, no matter how skilled the crews, the success of Operation Judgement would hinge on mysteries still unresolved, weaknesses in Italian defenses that no one fully understood. And as they neared the harbor's edge, flying into the unknown, those unanswered questions followed them like shadows across the moonlit sea. The Swordfish crews approached Taranto in near-total darkness, guided only by the dim glow of the moon filtering through patches of drifting cloud. What they faced was unprecedented. A shallow, heavily fortified harbor bristling with anti-aircraft guns, searchlights, and torpedo nets. Not the sort of target any pilot would ordinarily dare to approach. Yet these men, flying biplanes that looked like relics from another era, were about to attempt one of the most daring naval strikes ever recorded. And as they closed in, some crew members began observing something odd. Defensive searchlights swept the sky, but not in the tight, overlapping patterns intelligence had predicted. There were gaps, strange pauses, as though the Italian operators were distracted or under conflicting orders. The struggle began long before the first torpedo dropped. Flying at mast height, barely above the Mediterranean surface, the crews felt every gust of wind, every vibration of their canvas and wire wings. They had no radar, no advanced navigation gear, only compasses, stopwatch timing, and the faint outline of Italy's coast creeping closer. One pilot later wrote, "The sea was so close you could see your reflection in it. If we dipped even a few feet, the mission would end with a splash." Many were young, barely in their 20s, yet carrying the burden of an operation that could alter the strategic balance of the entire Mediterranean campaign. As the first wave neared Taranto, flak erupted in the distance. Italian gunners had spotted something, likely the flares released by the small group of swordfish designated to illuminate the harbor. Brilliant magnesium light poured down, transforming the sleeping naval base into a stage of stark white glare and deep, trembling shadows. It was the moment of truth. The harbor was exactly as reconnaissance had shown. The battleships Conte di Cavour, Littorio, and Caio Duilio lay moored in tight formation. But something else drew the crew's attention. Several barrage balloons were missing, and some anti-torpedo nets seemed partially retracted for reasons that would never be fully explained. With the harbor lit, the first torpedo aircraft pressed their attack. Lieutenant Commander Williamson's Swordfish dove to barely 30 feet above the water, engines roaring as they skimmed toward the battleships. Italian searchlights swung wildly, catching the slow-moving biplanes in blinding beams. Tracer fire streaked the sky, forcing pilots to jink their fragile machines through torrents of metal. One observer reported seeing flak bursts tearing through the water so close that spray washed over his cockpit. Yet despite the chaos, the British maintained their attack pattern. Then came the insight gained only in the heat of battle. The torpedoes, modified with wooden fins to maintain a shallow run, behaved exactly as hoped. Sliding into Taranto's shallow waters, they maintained just enough depth to strike a battleship's vulnerable hull. The first torpedo slammed into Conte di Cavour, its explosion lighting the harbor like a massive spark. Minutes later, another swordfish delivered a decisive blow to Littorio. Italian crews scrambled to return fire, but some gun batteries remained silent, either hit during the initial strike or inexplicably unmanned. From the air, the British pilots could see smoke rising, oil spreading, sailors scrambling on deck in confusion. But they could also see something their commanders had never predicted: pockets of total inactivity. Entire sections of the harbor seemed slow to react, as if awaiting orders that did not come. After the war, Italian reports revealed conflicting accounts. Some officers insisted alarms sounded late. Others claimed communications failed at critical moments. Whether technical issues or human error caused the delay remains one of the lingering mysteries of Taranto. As the last aircraft of the first wave banked away, flak finally intensified. Italian gunners regained coordination, filling the sky with explosions. A swordfish from 813 Squadron took severe damage, its wings riddled with holes, but managed to limp back toward open sea. The crews had minutes to catch their breath before the second wave arrived. The initial shock of the attack had given way to full defensive engagement. Now every aircraft entering Taranto would face a far more alert, though still strangely inconsistent, response. The second wave roared in with torpedoes, bombs, and flares, striking Littorio again and targeting fuel depots and cruiser moorings. Yet even as Italian fire became more accurate, gaps persisted. Some crews reported areas of the harbor untouched by searchlights, as if certain sectors lacked power or personnel. No official Italian inquiry ever established a single cause. Faulty wiring from recent storms, absence of key officers, or simple wartime confusion, each theory carries its own plausibility. In the end, the first and second waves combined to deliver an overwhelming blow. Flames spread across battleship decks. The harbor filled with smoke and chaos. The attack had lasted only minutes, but its impact would ripple across naval history. Still, as the Swordfish regrouped over the Adriatic for their perilous return journey, one question stayed with many of the men who'd witnessed the eerie defensive inconsistencies firsthand. Had Taranto truly been taken by surprise? Or had something deeper disrupted the Italian response? By the early hours of November 12, 1940, the full scale of the Taranto attack became horrifyingly clear. From the air, British pilots could see battleships burning, oil slicks spreading across the harbor, and small fires consuming fuel stores. Conte di Cavour had capsized alongside its berth, and Littorio was heavily damaged but still afloat, listing ominously. The second wave of Swordfish had hit key targets with surgical precision, demonstrating not only the daring of the operation but the incredible skill and nerves of the British crews. Yet, amidst this apparent triumph, there were anomalies that would perplex historians for decades. The attack itself unfolded with surgical timing. After the first wave struck, the second group of Swordfish exploited the confusion, diving into sectors that had yet to come under fire. Anti-aircraft gunners scrambled to adjust, but many had already been neutralized by the initial torpedo strikes or simply failed to respond. Reports later suggested that some Italian coastal batteries never fired a shot, their crews missing entirely or delayed due to unclear orders. In a war diary, one British observer wrote, "It was as though the harbor itself had swallowed their defenses, leaving only smoke and fire as proof of resistance." The mystery of these gaps would remain unresolved, a haunting question in the operation's immediate aftermath. The human struggle in these moments cannot be understated. Sailors aboard the Italian ships were trapped in chaos, trying to operate damaged guns, extinguish fires, and save their comrades. One Italian officer recounted later, "We were fighting against fire and water, against fear itself. In that darkness, you could not tell friend from enemy." Meanwhile, British airmen flew back over open water, tired, exhilarated, and still facing the ever-present risk of return fire or mechanical failure. Several Swordfish barely made it home, wings riddled with shrapnel, engines smoking, their crews silently thankful for the relative calm of the sea. Insights from the operation reveal a unique combination of daring and technical innovation. The torpedoes used had been modified with wooden fins to prevent them from diving too deep in Taranto's shallow waters, a detail essential to the mission's success. British reconnaissance and intelligence had mapped the harbor meticulously, yet it was the real-time decision-making and bravery of the aircrews that ultimately determined outcomes. As Commander Williamson later wrote in his report, "Maps and plans can only guide. Courage and judgment in the moment strike the true blow." Yet the reveal, the full extent of the harbor's vulnerabilities, was as puzzling as it was dramatic. While the British celebrated the crippling of 3 battleships, historians noted that several Italian ships remained largely untouched, their defenses ineffective, or delayed in responding. Did technical malfunctions cause some batteries to fail? Were some officers hesitant to give the order to fire, unsure if it was an enemy strike or a false alarm? The absence of clear explanation adds a layer of mystery to what might otherwise have been a straightforward military victory. The application of lessons from Taranto would resonate far beyond the Mediterranean. The strike demonstrated the potential of carrier-based aircraft to dominate naval engagements, foreshadowing the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor less than a year later. It highlighted that even a seemingly secure harbor, defended with modern battleships and coastal artillery, could be vulnerable to a determined, innovative strike from above. For the British Navy, Taranto became both a triumph and a cautionary tale, underscoring the delicate balance of intelligence, preparation, and human initiative. Yet even as historians pieced together the sequence of events, the unanswered questions lingered. Why had some observation posts remained silent during the attack? Why were some anti-aircraft positions unmanned? Several Italian officers were later quietly reassigned or removed from duty, fueling speculation of internal confusion, miscommunication, or even negligence. The mystery deepened when post-war analyses revealed that some logs were incomplete, suggesting either chaos in the record-keeping or intentional obfuscation. As the sun rose over Taranto, casting light on the battered harbor, the true scale of the operation's success was visible, but so were the enigmatic gaps in Italian defense. Ships that should have responded more effectively had failed to act, leaving historians and naval analysts questioning what had really occurred in those tense, smoke-filled hours. The night of November 11th to 12th had shattered an Italian fleet, but it had also shattered certainty. And as British crews returned to illustrious, exhausted yet triumphant, one thought lingered. The story of Taranto was far from fully told, and the mysteries of its harbor defenses would haunt naval scholars for decades to come. By dawn, the Mediterranean air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning oil. Taranto's harbor, once a symbol of Italian naval strength, lay crippled under the eerie quiet of early morning. From the air, the aftermath of Operation Judgement was unmistakable. The battleships Conte di Cavour and Littorio were severely damaged, moored cruisers listed precariously, and tugboats worked frantically to prevent sinking. The British pilots of the Swordfish squadrons, having completed one of the most audacious carrier strikes in history, looked down upon what seemed to be absolute chaos, but closer inspection would reveal puzzling inconsistencies. The Italian response, or lack thereof, was especially perplexing. While some coastal batteries had finally engaged the attackers during the second wave, other guns remained silent, smoke rising from unexplained gaps in the defensive line. Later investigations by Italian naval authorities found that several observation posts had failed to report incoming aircraft, and radar and searchlight coordination had been inconsistent at best. Rear Admiral Inigo Campione's post-action reports hinted at communication failures and uncertain orders, yet offered little clarity. The struggle between human error, mechanical failure, and perhaps poor leadership had played out dramatically under the cover of night. On the human level, the psychological impact was profound. Sailors and officers scrambled to salvage what remained of their fleet, attempting to fight fires, prevent ships from capsizing, and rescue injured comrades. One Italian engineer later recalled, "It was as if the harbor had betrayed us. Orders were shouted, yet few were heard, and when commands came, it was often too late." Meanwhile, British observers aboard Illustrious celebrated cautiously. The operation had succeeded beyond expectation, but no one aboard the carrier fully understood why the Italian defenses had been so inconsistent. Was it chaos, inexperience, or something more? Perhaps a flaw in the harbor's chain of command? Insights from Operation Judgement would influence naval doctrine for decades. For the Royal Navy, the strike proved the value of precise, low-level torpedo attacks launched from carriers. The effectiveness of relatively slow, outdated Swordfish biplanes against modern battleships demonstrated that innovation and daring could outweigh technological superiority. The attack also showcased the importance of meticulous intelligence gathering, from aerial reconnaissance to decoded communications. Yet, the mysteries of Italian inaction remained. Why had critical defenses failed to operate, leaving some sectors of the harbor vulnerable while others remained protected? The reveal came gradually in post-war analysis. Some Italian officers later testified that confusion during the attack led to miscommunication across multiple levels of command. Orders to deploy anti-aircraft batteries were delayed or misinterpreted. Personnel assigned to barrage balloons were absent or reassigned. Searchlights failed to track aircraft effectively. These lapses, though partially understood, never fully explained the scale of the defensive breakdown. Even decades later, historians debate the extent to which the disaster was due to incompetence versus unforeseen operational advantages exploited by the British. From an application standpoint, Taranto became a case study in the interplay between strategy, preparation, and chance. The Royal Navy had planned for every technical and tactical eventuality, yet the unexpected human errors on the Italian side amplified the effectiveness of their operation. It served as a warning to naval planners worldwide. Even the most fortified positions could collapse under the weight of precise, audacious action paired with unforeseen vulnerabilities. In many ways, Taranto demonstrated that success in war depends not only on machinery and maps but on the unpredictable human element. As the Italian Navy scrambled to restore order, questions lingered about the gaps in defensive response. Records revealed discrepancies between duty rosters and actual personnel on site, fueling speculation about negligence or failures in leadership. A few officers who were present that night were quietly reassigned, removed from posts, or never publicly held accountable. Such details cast a shadow over the apparent clarity of the operation's outcome. By mid-morning, the fires in Taranto were largely under control, but the harbor remained a haunting tableau of destruction, uncertainty, and unanswered questions. Operation Judgement had delivered a tactical masterpiece, crippling Italy's battleship fleet with minimal British losses. Yet the enigmatic failures, the silent guns, and the missing personnel left a lingering tension. What had truly unfolded in those smoke-filled hours? And what secrets would the survivors of Taranto carry with them, locked away in duty logs, diaries, and the silent corridors of command? As British sailors navigated the calm waters back to Alexandria, and Italian officers began their painstaking reconstruction, one fact remained certain. The night had changed the Mediterranean forever, but the story of its chaos and mystery was only beginning to unfold. In the days following Operation Judgement, the Italian Navy was forced into frantic damage control and introspection. Reports flowed into Rome detailing the shocking destruction at Taranto. 2 battleships severely damaged, 1 capsized, cruisers burning, and logistical installations gutted. Admiral Inigo Campioni and his staff scrambled to restore order and determine the cause of the failure, convening emergency councils to assess the defensive lapses. Yet even with these investigations, answers were incomplete. Logs were missing, eyewitness accounts conflicted, and some critical officers were absent from key positions during the attack. The human element, confusion, fear, miscommunication, loomed as large as the physical devastation. The struggle to understand what had gone wrong was compounded by morale issues. Sailors returned to crippled ships, many of which could not leave harbor without significant repairs. The harbor itself, once a symbol of Italian naval prowess, became a stark reminder of vulnerability. One Italian officer wrote privately, "We were prepared for battle but not for the betrayal of our own procedures." Reports revealed that the failure to deploy anti-aircraft guns effectively, gaps in searchlight coverage, and absent barrage balloons were not isolated incidents. Each anomaly added layers to a mystery that commanders struggled to untangle. Meanwhile, British naval strategists monitored the aftermath with cautious satisfaction. Operation Judgement had achieved near-total surprise, crippling a fleet that had posed a constant threat to Allied convoys. Yet, even in victory, they noted the remarkable degree of defensive inconsistencies that allowed the attack to succeed with minimal losses. The success relied not only on daring tactics and precise planning but also on gaps, perhaps human error, perhaps technical fault, within the Italian command structure. In a sense, the operation had exploited both physical and organizational vulnerabilities. Investigators in Italy scoured communication logs, personnel rosters, and after-action reports. Some entries raised eyebrows. Certain duty officers were unaccounted for. Others reported equipment failures that could not be independently verified. A few were reassigned quietly. Some retired under ambiguous circumstances. Historians examining these details later speculated whether internal confusion, lack of training, or bureaucratic mismanagement had amplified the effects of the British strike. The truth may never be fully known, leaving a lingering shadow over the seemingly straightforward tactical success. The insight gained extended beyond the Mediterranean. For naval scholars and Allied planners, Taranto illustrated how a meticulously executed strike could neutralize superior forces without a protracted battle. For the Axis, it was a stark lesson in the importance of coordination, readiness, and communication. The operation also foreshadowed future carrier-based attacks, including Japan's assault on Pearl Harbor, where similar principles of surprise, low-altitude torpedo strikes, and meticulous planning would be applied on a far grander scale. Yet the human stories remained compelling. Italian sailors and officers who survived the attack carried the burden of that night with them. Trauma, guilt, and unanswered questions. Diaries reveal confusion and panic, moments where courage and chaos intertwined. One officer recalled witnessing a gun crew frozen in indecision, hesitating while the swordfish swept overhead. Such incidents illustrated that even seasoned personnel, in the fog of war, could falter, and that these lapses could have strategic consequences far beyond the immediate moment. As the Italian Navy worked to restore order, the shadow of suspicion lingered. Who had failed in their duties? Was it mechanical error, incompetence, or simply the disorienting nature of combat? A handful of personnel were quietly removed from posts, fueling whispers and speculation. Combined with incomplete records, these gaps in accountability added a layer of mystery to an already extraordinary operation. Even today, researchers debate whether Taranto's defensive failures were chance, negligence, or a combination of factors that simply cannot be definitively unraveled. By the end of November 1940, Taranto remained a puzzle as much as it was a battlefield. The British had struck decisively, but the full story of why the harbor's defenses collapsed was unresolved. For historians, the incident represented both a tactical triumph and a case study in the fragility of command, coordination, and human judgment. And as Italian officers, sailors, and Allied analysts alike reflected on the attack, one question remained. What could have been done differently, and why had so many seemingly obvious defenses failed when the stakes were highest? Operation Judgement had shifted the balance of power in the Mediterranean, but it also left a lingering uncertainty. The destruction was visible, but the deeper truth, the hidden failures, the silent guns, and the absent officers, remained partially obscured. For those piecing together the night's events, the mystery endured, hinting that history often holds more questions than answers, even in the wake of apparent victory. By late November 1940, the full strategic implications of Operation Judgement were becoming clear. The British had delivered a crippling blow to the Italian Navy, but the ripples of Taranto extended far beyond the Mediterranean. Japanese military observers, studying the success of carrier-based torpedo strikes, began to consider the feasibility of similar operations against distant naval bases, a lesson that would eventually echo in the planning for Pearl Harbor. Yet while analysts praised the tactical brilliance of the British, the enigma of Taranto's defensive collapse continued to draw scrutiny. Certain elements remained unresolved: gaps in Italian communications, unexplained inactivity of key gun crews, and the fate of several officers whose presence or absence might have altered the outcome. The struggle to fully understand the Italian response, or lack thereof, was compounded by fragmented wartime records. Some action logs were incomplete or inconsistent, and oral testimonies often conflicted with official reports. Italian officers who survived the night reported confusion, fear, and disbelief. One wrote in his personal diary, "We were ready in theory, but in practice, we were paralyzed. Orders came too late, or not at all. The enemy was everywhere, yet nowhere we could fire upon them effectively." These accounts suggest that human error, compounded by technical and procedural failures, was as decisive as the British strategy in determining the battle's outcome. The insight gleaned from these inconsistencies underscores a fundamental lesson in wartime operations. Even a well-defended position is vulnerable when coordination breaks down. Operation Judgement demonstrated that preparation, daring, and innovation could exploit such weaknesses with devastating effect. British intelligence and planning had been meticulous, but the success also relied on the unpredictable variables of human performance under pressure. In that tension, between precision and uncertainty, history was made. The reveal, decades later, has continued to intrigue naval historians. Why did some Italian observation posts remain silent? Why did searchlights fail to track the attacking swordfish in critical moments? Were some personnel negligent, or simply overwhelmed by the chaos of a night attack of unprecedented scale? Investigations revealed reassigned officers, missing personnel, and equipment failures whose precise impact may never be fully known. These unanswered questions turned Taranto from a simple tale of victory into a complex puzzle of wartime human behavior, organizational shortcomings, and strategic ingenuity. For the Allies, the practical applications were immediate. The success of a relatively small force against a major fleet highlighted the potency of carrier-based operations, influencing naval doctrine worldwide. It proved that surprise, careful reconnaissance, and the audacity to exploit vulnerabilities could achieve results far disproportionate to the size of the attacking force. The British fleet had not only crippled 2 battleships but also reshaped the future of naval warfare, setting a precedent for similar operations across the globe. Yet the human dimension remained poignant. Italian sailors struggled to reconcile their survival with the loss of comrades and the destruction of pride and vessels. British airmen reflected on the perilous conditions, the intensity of anti-aircraft fire, and the extraordinary risks of low-altitude night flying. The operation's success carried with it a silent acknowledgement. History often turns on the actions of individuals as much as on strategy and machinery. Every decision, hesitation, and act of courage or error contributed to a chain reaction whose consequences would reverberate far beyond that harbor. By December 1940, as the Mediterranean settled into a tenuous calm, the broader implications of Taranto were clear. Italy's naval power had been weakened, Allied supply lines had gained breathing room, and the future of naval air warfare had been transformed. Yet the mysteries of the night lingered. Unexplained silences, missing reports, and reassigned officers continued to puzzle historians. These unresolved elements serve as a reminder that even in meticulously documented operations, shadows remain. Shadows that invite investigation, speculation, and reflection. Operation Judgement had shattered an Italian fleet and demonstrated the power of innovative naval tactics, but it also left enduring questions. The fires burned out, the ships were repaired, and the world moved on. But the full story of Taranto's defenses, the missed opportunities, and the human missteps remains partially hidden in history's archives. And in that ambiguity lies the enduring fascination of the night when a handful of British biplanes changed the course of Mediterranean naval warfare, leaving behind a tale of brilliance, bravery, and the haunting mysteries of war.